it's not going to help him to say, you're right, I never should have done it, forget it, I'm done. Nope, I would say the same thing to him if he told me they threw it in the trash. I'll send you a new one, keep working on it, because you're your own advocate.
So when he went in for this team meeting, and this is great advice for all of you, because all of you within that first 30 days are going to meet with your case manager, and some case managers are more vested than others. When I did my probation interview a very long time ago, it was a new probation officer who was so excited to be a probation officer. It was like a 2-hour interview. I know some people who have probation interviews, they feel like it's 10 minutes, right? The person is brushing them out of the room. Maybe they've been doing it 30 years and they're over it. I don't know. What I know is the value of preparing. And within 30 days, you are going to meet with a case manager. So Amy, walk us through it one more time. Paul walks in for his team meeting and he just says, here's my release plan. Did they ask for it or did he volunteer it?
You know, Justin, unfortunately, I don't have that much detailed information. I can ask him. I don't even know how long the meeting was, but I'm guessing it was long enough for him to get a lot of this information and for them to be so impressed with him. Let's say his case manager does have some compassion left, or maybe she's the person who's inclined to help the person who really wants to help themselves. And could see that in my husband's preparation. And I think the vast majority of the case managers, there must be some reason why they are in this line of work. If they are supposed to help people get to the other side, get through this and get to the other side, they don't really truly want to see you back in there. And his release plan was so well planned out, so well documented with everything he was, is, and plans to be, that they were very impressed by it.
So that's what we're going to continue. And so when we talk about Paul's first 30 days in prison or your first 30 days in federal prison, you want to look towards the end. And an interview I continue to share is the interview with Chris Maloney, the former chief of probation, who in an interview with Michael said, your eventual probation officer is going to look at your probation report. And that report it's not going to convey things that you're proud of. It's not going to convey a message that reflects the totality of your life. It just focuses on your crime. So without this release plan or record, that probation officer is eventually going to judge you based on that pre-sentence report. And part of the reason people frequently go to the halfway house, well, has anyone here been to the halfway house thus far? I know many of you have. I know when I was in the halfway house, there were a lot of people that said, man, I wish I was back in prison. Scott, when you were in the halfway house, were there some guys that said, wow, I wish I finished this time in federal prison?
Yeah, definitely. It was a big change, and it was really ironic to have that attitude after spending so much time wanting to leave a place that people are saying, I want to go back.
So part of the reason people say that is because the halfway house, they don't have a job lined up, or they say they have a job lined up and the case manager doesn't approve it. And if it's not documented or well written with evidence behind the job and the income and the plan, as Chris Maloney told Michael, of course they're not going to approve it. Of course they're not going to approve it. They're going to encourage you to go to a local coffee shop or fast food restaurant because halfway houses have relationships with the local employers. All work is honorable, that's fine. But if your goal is higher levels of liberty and an easier journey, that comes back to what I said to Amy a few minutes ago. Even if Paul's case manager threw it in the trash, and it didn't influence the case manager to the degree that we had hoped. Even in this case, it did, because the case manager said, teach a class on the release plan. So it worked. But even if it didn't, maybe it influences the probation officer down the road if Paul wants to return to the business. So touch on that, Amy, for a little bit.
Yes. That's like, this goes along with everything I've heard before. I do know what interview you're talking about because I just listened to it on my way to work yesterday. So with the Maloney. So let's say that they did throw it in the trash. It's what you said about the pre-sentence report and how it follows you. Well, one of the things I keep hearing over and over again is that this is my husband's chance to change his narrative, how he goes forward with what he's doing. And he's not sitting in prison biding his time and watching TV. He is doing productive activities every day to move through every day the best he can. He came out of that meeting with the best possible scenario that he could have even hoped for. He didn't even know what he was hoping for. And I will say though that you may be surprised to hear that the federal court system and the Bureau of Prisons don't talk to each other. My husband had paid all fines and restitution prior to even setting foot in the sentencing hearing. But the Bureau of Prisons, his team manager and case manager, informed him that they have absolutely no record that he's paid anything. And at the end of April, they will start to take it out of his commissary account.
So this is part of the maze and the bureaucracy we want to work our way through. So for those of you who give your release plan to your case manager, we hope you get the response that Paul did. If you didn't, that doesn't mean you don't continue to build and document it. So while Paul's initial plan might be 10 or 15 pages, by the time you go back to that team meeting in 3 or 6 months, it better not still be 10 or 15 pages. It needs to be growing. You need to be documenting what you're doing while in prison. And even from that first team meeting, within that first 30 days in prison, you will have already signed up for some programming. Now, it's one thing to say, this is the programming that I'm in. It's another thing to begin to articulate in that plan why I'm enrolled in the programming, how it's helping me. Give credit to your case manager for encouraging you to enroll in programming, and document how it's helping you, because this is something that's going to follow you throughout your whole journey. As my case manager said to me, all you inmates stand outside my office telling me you want to go home. You should have thought about that before you broke the law. You've got to show, you've got to build, and you absolutely need to document it. Someone left a message here, Ryan, if you would engage us, someone who's currently in the halfway house. And then Linda, we'll come back to you about that team meeting. Ryan, you wrote, my case manager told me the same thing about my release plan and said she passed it along to my RRC manager, but unfortunately she did not really pass it along. Luckily, I had my wife bring a copy with me when I arrived at the RRC so I could present it then. Ryan, can you share with us your experience and how you think that helped you while you were in prison?
Yeah, it was really funny just listening to her story about her husband's experience. I had my case manager at my camp say the exact same thing to me of, you could teach a class with how to do release plans, and it was very complimentary about the plan itself. She had also expressed that she had sent it along to the RRC as well, but I found out that that was not the case when I arrived here. But one of the things I had learned through all of these videos and webinars was, always have your release plan with you, always be updating it, always have extra copies, because you never know when you're going to need it. So immediately when I met with my case manager here, I presented that to him, and it kind of blew him away, and it helped me proceed faster through this process than it normally would be without that release plan in place.
I appreciate you sharing that. Now, Dave, you wrote, and this comes to the other side of it. Dave, if you would engage us, you wrote, I got the opposite response from Paul. So Dave, if you're here, I'd love for you to engage us and share with us, what did your case manager say to you when you tried to share your release plan or plans you had in prison, or when you were done? If someone can share that with Dave, if you can share that with us.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So I had the case. I had a case manager that wasn't the best case manager, to say it very politely, and I came from Fort Dix. So I go in, first team meeting within 5 days or so. I present her the release plan. It was about 20 pages long, filled with letters specifically addressed to her in her name. I did all the fine details, the resume, started working on the book report, so on and so forth. And I presented it to her. She looked at it and she said, "What is this?" I said, "It's my release plan. Just wanted to present this to you, show you that I'm going to try to be the best possible person I can be in here, work towards better goals, so on and so forth." And, she looked at me, she threw it back at me, and basically said, "All right, I don't need this, sign this paperwork," and your team meeting was finished. So I took that, I left, I continued to work towards the plan. I continued to read the books, write about them. In addition to any productive activity I did, I stayed away from the TV room, so on and so forth. And I just kept building that file. The next week, I went back when she had open house hours, and I said, "Hey, I just wanted to drop by and give you an update. As I told you originally, going to try to be the best person I can be. And here I am, sticking to that goal." And I was very consistent with it. So as I kept going week after week, presenting this update to her, she finally, I guess, sat down and said to me, this looks great. Here's what I'll do. I'll scan it into the central system. So now everyone has access to it. So I asked her, who is everyone? What are you referring to? And her response was, well, anyone can see it that looks you up. So to me, that was progress, because now, depending on where I go, the RRC, probation, they can pull that up, they can see it, they can take a look at it, even though she didn't want to. But I just kept being proactive and just kept going in. But it really didn't move the needle with her.
So what I would argue, thank you you did something that we encourage all of you to do within the first 30 days in prison. You're nurturing, right? Many of you, if you worked with our company, it's a period of nurturing over time. Maybe you watched a video, you listened to a podcast. It's a nurturing process. All of you who are married, you didn't meet your now spouse and say, hi, I'm Justin, would you like to marry me? They think you were insane, right? There is a nurturing process. You don't need to close the deal that moment. It is a nurturing process. When any of you ask for character letters, it's off-putting. You call someone after 3 years and say, hey, I pled guilty, I'm going to jail, will you write a letter for me? Typically doesn't go great. If you're nurturing those relationships over a period of time and you're in touch with people and you ask for the letter, they're not going to feel used. You've nurtured it. Most likely they're going to agree to the letter. So you are nurturing a relationship with your case manager. So the end result here for Dave, I think, was incredibly productive, but it started with, I don't need this, essentially leave my office. This may go in the trash, but he didn't give up and complain, which is what some prisoners will do. Some prisoners within 7 days of their release, of their surrender to prison, are asking for their computation sheet. Now you can do that, I suppose, but what's the upside of that? When you haven't even enrolled in program, what's the upside of bugging or pushing your case manager? And in Dave's case, who didn't really want to work to begin with, now you're asking them to do more work. So leave it with them, whether they review it or not. The most important is the next meeting and what you do in between that meeting. And I think Dave is a testament to that, from my experience. Now, there are some people who choose to put their release plan online for the world to see. I called on Mr. Carper a little bit earlier in our webinar. His son, Scott, does a newsletter every single Monday. That is essentially his release plan. If you were to read it, it's pretty impressive. It's documenting his growth through prison. And that's a great way. Mr. Carper, I know within Scott's days of surrendering to prison, he began writing this. Do you think the writing is helping his journey? And also, are people vested? Do people look forward to reading what your son is doing in federal prison?
The answer is absolutely. And it's been one of the ways that he keeps busy. I mean, his schedule now is daunting. He's taking 2 classes. He's teaching a 3rd one. He has 2 jobs, and he's doing the newsletter, and he's in RDAP. And he's teaching a class in RDAP on release plans. That's part of what he's doing in RDAP. But it's been incredibly productive. The letters are interesting. They go out to people who are his friends. They go out to some of the people who are my friends. And my friends, we have breakfast. They want to talk about it. It's been terrific, and it was his idea, and it's kind of a version of him doing what you guys have been talking about in his own way, and it's been terrific.
So,
and he had a similar experience to some of the ones others have talked about when he first went in release plan. Initially, not too interested, not really used to it. I mean, this is not something all the case officers are used to getting. So it has a little bit of a time, I think, for them to understand what it is, and I guess figure out whether they're being manipulated or not, or God knows what they think from their perspective. But again, consistency, I believe, changes minds over time. If your behavior is consistent with what you in fact are presenting as yourself, it eventually, I think, makes a difference for most of them.
I would agree with that. We have to understand the BOP is a big bureaucracy. more than 56,000 people. And even though there's been change at the top with the new director who's more reform minded, it takes time to trickle down to staff. And I know there are staff who have told inmates, you don't even qualify for the First Step Act. And of course you do. And it's frustrating. So, and I know Michael is traveling to prisons and jails across the country to implement our programs. And I'm sure at times there could be, I haven't heard anything, but I would presume there could be a response from staff like, I can't believe a guy that served 26 consecutive years in prison is not just here to speak, but now we're implementing his programs. Well, that only happened because of his documented release plan going back more than 30 years. So we encourage all of you to be patient, to recognize that there may be some staff who may dismiss and ignore your efforts. But as Ryan articulated, if you stick with it and you nurture it and you develop it, in time it could influence them. Like, okay, I'm going to put this in your central file. Stop bothering me. I love that part of Shawshank Redemption where Andy Dufresne continues to work on the library and books and writing letters for free books and free books and free books. Then eventually they send him a check with some books and they say, we consider this matter closed. Stop reaching out to us. And he said, now I'm going to write him 2 letters a week. We want you to have that same nurturing process, but not by asking and begging. Maintain your dignity, but by developing it and creating it and sharing it. So Mr. Carper's son, Scott, does it by way of a newsletter. There are people who can do it simply by way of core links. Scott's fortunate to have his dad develop and maintain this newsletter. You don't have to do it that way. Go to core links, write an email to everyone. When you send a message within that first 30 days, within the first day, you can message it to absolutely everyone on your contact list. And of course, the email can be saved. It's part of your file. And if you have the right messaging, it could advance your agenda with staff if they're reading it. You're writing about your programming, but also Amy's, the wives, the husbands of the world can at least say, I'm not happy that my husband's in prison, but he's not watching TV all day and complaining. He's productive, and I can't fault him for that, because I do get calls from spouses who have said, I'm not going for 6 months. I'm done making the effort to see him. He's got a great tan and he's in great shape, but he's not ready to come home. I have no idea what the hell he's going to do to sustain a family. And it's great that he's exercising, but I don't think he should be exercising for 7 hours a day while I'm working. What is he going to do when he comes home? He doesn't have the answer. We just had a horrific visit. I ain't going back. That is pretty common. It's part of the reason when I was in prison, I saw some guys turning down visits with the wife and children alone in the visiting room, turning away the visit. So if you can look towards the end of your prison term and begin to reverse engineer your way back, you'll say, okay, all of this starts with avoiding problems, which is why you need to watch the disciplinary infraction webinar. And if you don't watch it, you're not ready to go to prison. If you don't understand how showing up late to work twice can derail your whole prison plan, you're not ready to go to prison. If you don't understand how associating with the wrong people can derail your goals in prison, you're not ready to go to prison. Please watch the webinars. Please come with questions. We're here to help and guide you. But I can assure you, if you're only doing this to avoid problems, even if you don't want to work all day and be productive and write and do a newsletter, even if your goal is, I want to avoid problems, fine, watch the webinar. So at least you'll get your good time and you'll maximize your earned time credits by way of the First Step Act. Please avoid problems. Watch our webinars. Some people will document their release plan by way of a website. And I mentioned that Scott did that, of course. I encourage you to follow Glenn Hudson's journey. He's writing book reports. Why did he read it? How is the book helping him? How will this book help him upon his release? And of course, well, let me ask all of you. Let's engage for a moment. If you've watched the subject matter interviews we've done, with whom do you think Glenn should be sharing this work? Or Paul, Amy's husband, Paul, sharing this release plan? Who else should the release plan be shared with besides the case manager? Can anyone engage with me and tell me with whom this content should be shared? Can someone join with me, please?
Yeah, Justin, this is Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Yeah, I would say with everyone. I mean, everyone on the outside that knows your loved ones, that know that you're in there, friends, so they can see, make them feel better, I guess, about it's not as bad as it seems. I mean, of course, I'm awaiting sentencing, so I haven't been in prison yet, but based on these webinars and listening to everybody talk and talking with Scott before, it has eased my mind of what to expect, I guess.
What are your thoughts on sharing your release plan within that first month with your prosecutor and judge? Anyone have any thoughts on that? Good or bad idea? Someone give me your thoughts. Think it's a good idea? Anyone?
Yeah, I'll give my legal. Well, I don't know if it's practice.
Give us your opinion from the perspective of a prisoner. You surrender to prison. You're there for 2
Yes,
weeks.
I did. I was got VOP. As far as a lesson plan, it's what they teach us in law school. I'm taking criminal defense tactics and strategies. Is that it's very good to have a release plan and something you want to turn in like at 2 to 3 months. You turn it on 1 month. The professor, of course, we have 2. She believes it that it's kind of off-putting it. Hey, I just sentenced you, and now you're talking about a release. You know, it irritates the judge a little bit. It irritates the judge. It irritates your correction officers and the warden, the assistant warden, the lieutenants. On the other hand, she did say there's a slight chance that if it's submitted before the sentencing, the judge will say this guy's got a plan, and he wants to do what he wants to make amends. So it's kind of shifty which way to go.
So here's what we've learned. The second you get a target letter or you're arrested or plead guilty, you're in the post-offense conduct, and you've got to begin changing the narrative and creating a new record. So we have people in our community who, besides the personal narrative, they have histories of alcohol and substance abuse, have documented it for purposes of treatment in prison. Besides the character reference letters, people in our community are showing up at their sentencing hearing with their release plan, and then it's going to build. And the reason we suggest sharing this work is because of the perception of you. I attended a sentencing via Zoom recently, and the judge was utterly ruthless to our client. Still got a lower than guideline sentence. Said very terrible things to this executive in Ohio. You're a career criminal. If this was in person, I'd remand you to custody right now. I think you're going to reoffend. You are a menace to society. It was ruthless. Ironically, he's still got a below guideline sentence. But look at the perception that judge has of him. You tell me one thing, you do another. You're telling me exactly what I want to hear. How ironic you're proposing volunteer work right now to get a shorter prison term. If you really were committed to volunteer work, you would have been doing it leading up to sentencing. Everything federal judges have told us this judge felt this defendant was doing. And we began working with him a couple of weeks before sentencing. And the first thing that I said to him was, hey, bud, can't change the bad decisions you've made over the last 2 years leading up to this sentencing. We can't perform magic. You have 2 weeks. Let's do the best we can. Can't change that for 2 years, his lawyer said, you don't need to prepare. I'm a former US attorney. You're in good shape. Did nothing. But post-sentencing, knowing how this judge perceives him, let's go back to what Chris Maloney said. I love that Amy listened to the interview yesterday. How many of you listened to that interview? I think it's the most important subject matter interview expert we have. Why? Because all of you want to get off federal probation early. All of you want higher levels of liberty in the halfway house. All of you want to be self-employed. And I know, even though I say work is honorable, you don't want to go work at KFC, which is where they send people at the halfway house that I went to in Hollywood. In Hollywood, if you don't have a job, they say, that's cool, go to KFC. We have an agreement with them. Nothing wrong with serving chicken, but I know you want to return to your own business. And what does Chris Maloney say you have to do? You've got to change the narrative. How do you change it? He suggested if it's the right message, you share it with your prosecutor. Why? Have any of you tried to get off probation early? I know Nate Schott is a former client. He's not on this. Is anyone here want to get off probation early? I presume not.
I got off probation early of 60 months. I got off in 35.
There you go. I can tell you the prosecutor will approve or deny it. They're going to make a recommendation to the judge. So Chris Maloney suggested if it's the right message and there's evidence of rehabilitation that starts the day you surrender to prison, frankly, it should start before you go to prison like Paul did. But if you haven't done it yet, or you're going to wait, what you're doing in prison, how you're building it, because eventually that probation officer is going to reach out to your prosecutor. So does it make sense for you to influence the prosecutor? Probably. Chris Maloney also said many judges, unbeknownst to the defendants do not know that many judges follow along the defendant's journey. You think the judge sentences you, you go off, you never hear from him or her again. And Chris Maloney said some judges will follow the defendant. How's he doing? Now, some judges will make that vocal at a sentencing hearing, like Judge Carter in Santa Ana, who says, I will be following you. And when you get out of prison, I want you to come and see me and tell me what you did. And if you did good, I'm going to let you off probation early. Some judges will say it, some will not, but they're following you. So is it in your interest if you share this work with your prosecutor and judge? Of course. Additionally, you should share it with your probation officer while you're in prison, because they're going to review it, we hope. Now, many of you have said, I don't even know who my probation officer is. That's okay. It's not hard to find out the district in which you were sentenced. And when I was in prison with Michael, I said that same thing to him. I don't even know who to send this letter to. And he said, find the district in which you were sentenced, send it to the chief probation officer in that district. Your first commissary shopping, within a week or two of going to prison, buy a copy card, write it, make a copy, send it. Yeah, there's a chance the probation officer never gets it. Mine did. They eventually turned it over to Isaiah Murrow. But if they don't, when you meet that probation officer in the halfway house, because that probation officer will need to approve your job, a job you should have been nurturing and sowing seeds by way of your release plan from prison, which makes it likelier that it gets approved. If they didn't get it, you have copies of it. Here's the 6 release plans I sent to you, updated along the way. Did you receive it? Yes or no? If not, here it is. It's exactly what I did. And it's the reason I was able to work with convicted criminals, of which I am, the day that I was released from prison, when everyone in prison said it ain't ever going to happen. The release plan is crucial. Whether we help you or not, you've got to build it immediately. Any questions on the first 30 days, jobs, visitation, mail, communication? Are there any questions we're not getting, or anything that I'm missing right here? Anything? You make sure, are there any questions about the first 30 days or people's imminent surrender to prison? I know many people in our community that March apparently is going to be a very big month with a number of people surrendering. Is there anyone that has questions about, someone's mentioning bring your COVID card as well? Ryan, so you're suggesting when people surrender, if they're vaccinated, they should bring their COVID card, their vaccination card?
Yes, at my camp, they were still doing this for the people that did not have their card with them. They were, even if they were vaccinated, they were still required to quarantine. And in our case, that was being quarantined in the shoe. So you weren't with anybody. So that would be the start of your camp visit.
Where did you serve time, Ryan?
In Thompson, Illinois.
Oh, it's good to see you, Ryan. That's right. Good to see you. And so for all of you, of course, we've covered at length by way of our prior webinars. We've done a top 10 surrendering to prison. And in that, we share resources, videos that we film that teach you how to send emails, how to send money, how to send mail, creating your book list, writing and creating your release plan, surrendering with medications. There's a good idea. If any of you are on medications, we encourage you to spend time on the BOP formulary list. Frank and I, we've discussed that at length, and going through medications and understanding. If you're surrendering to prison, that's an adjustment. If you're on medications as well and you're not getting them, that too is an adjustment. You want to prepare and plan for that now as best you can. If not, it can feel like a great shock as you surrender to a new environment and an open dorm with lights and noise and smells and a surrounding that is foreign to you. It could be even harder if you're not getting your medication. So I'm not a physician, though I'd encourage you to spend time, if you take medications before your surrender, to review the BOP formulary list and with your physician to get an assessment of what you may or may not be able to access. People who work in our community, Michael Santos is a nurse. She understands BOP policy as well as anyone. She has spoken with many of you, but I'd encourage you to surrender with medication. Some of you may have sleeping issues, a CPAP machine. Is that what CPAP, you're able to surrender?
CPAP, yes.
Yeah, you're able to surrender with that, your contact list. And you just want to get off on the right start from that first day, and avoiding problems. And there are so many little things that get into trouble. Someone asked a question about requesting kosher meals prior to surrender. What are ways to get a preferred job? To the kosher meals, yes. Has anyone here been on the kosher diet menu in prison? They could walk us through how they did it. If not,
You just have to follow. I did it at Coleman, which is in the North Florida.
Yeah.
And even if you don't, I'm half Jewish, and I don't really keep kosher, but to get better meals. You know, just like on the old airline flights, you don't get meals anymore. But there's a form. I think it's form 401B.
Yeah.
Is that right? 401B?
I don't know if it's 401B. I know there's a form you need to fill out. Yeah, and you get approved. And when you go to the chow hall, they may call you aside, check off your list, confirm that you're on it. By the way, it is a disciplinary infraction if you're on the kosher menu and you eat food in the chow hall that is not part of the kosher menu. Also, when you are on the kosher menu, I think you're limited to things that you can buy in the commissary. And if there are things in your locker that are not kosher, that can be a disciplinary infraction. That's how easily it can happen. Okay. So if you're going to be kosher, be kosher. There's a lot of people, this was like when I was in prison, guys are like, the kosher menu is more expensive. So because I'm on the kosher menu and it's more expensive, they're not going to want to feed me and pay for it. So they're going to give me more halfway house time. So these are a lot of the things you hear in prison that are frankly utter nonsense, but you hear it at first and you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe I'll go on the kosher menu, which I did not. I want you to think about these things, but I knew of one guy who had food in his locker, claimed to be kosher, had food in his locker from the commissary, and they wrote him up for it because you get a commissary receipt. They see that he's kosher, and it's very easy to see. This ain't on the kosher list, disciplinary infraction. How? He says somebody turned him in. I don't know. Just like that, it can really derail your program. Okay. Someone asked about the preferred job. Scott, how long did it take for you to get a job at Yankton? Like in the first 2 weeks, you go through an admissions and orientation, right?
You know, it was interesting. Some people, it took a week or two. I walk up to the call out sheet one day. I had a job about 48 hours after I got out of COVID quarantine. I was in the kitchen at 5:50 in the morning.
So when you surrender, make sure you look at the call out list every day. The call out list will tell you where you need to be. Someone mentioned earlier in our webinar that if you don't show up for like a medical appointment, yeah, that is a disciplinary infraction. And if you don't look at the call out list and see that you're supposed to be somewhere, then that could be a disciplinary infraction. So good idea to look at the call out list every day. That's actually someone's job. That's a great job. You walk around to the dorm and post the call out list. It takes about 6 seconds. That's the job I'd like to have in a minimum security camp. It's someone's job. Check out the call out list every single day. It's true. They won't give you a job until you clear admissions and orientation. That's correct. At times they have, but generally speaking, in my case, my 14th day in prison, I got a job. And this answers the question, how can someone be proactive looking for a job? When you surrender, Michael encouraged me to do this. He said, just walk around the compound and see. Mark, I'll come to you in a moment. Michael said, walk around the compound and look for jobs that might interest you. Go to the kitchen, go to the library, go to recreation, go to the warehouse, look for jobs. Just don't wait for them to assign you a job. Try to be proactive. And I said, okay, I can do that. Then I found a job. I went to my case manager, Miss Mickleberry, and she said, no chance. All new prisoners go to the kitchen for 120 days. I said, okay. I told Michael, looks like I'm going to the kitchen. He's like, is that what you people do at USC? You just give up? How about you try to get the best? You try to get the best of the worst jobs in the kitchen. I'm like, okay. So I learned that people who run, there's a head orderly, someone in the kitchen, long-term prisoners with a lot of responsibility who will assign all of those jobs. So rather than wait to get assigned to be a baker at 3:30 in the morning, I found out the person that assigned the jobs in the kitchen. I went to him and said, I've learned I'm going to be assigned to the kitchen. You tell me what's available? He said, he was playing bocce ball. His name was Baker. He said, sure. You can be a baker at 3:30. You can do pots and pans in the morning or evening. You can do the buffet line 3 times a day, every other day. And I said, what would you do? He said, I don't care. I'm playing bocce ball. What job do you want? And I knew at that time I was exercising in the morning, wanted to get it over with. So I said, I'll do pots and pans in the afternoon and evening. So for the first 5 months, I did pots and pans from 12:15 to 1, and then from 5 to 6 for dinner, 5 days a week. So I want you to be proactive in looking for work, but there are people in our community. Someone recently surrendered to Pensacola for a very long prison term. And he went to the chaplain and there was an opening and he asked the case manager and the case manager said, fine. So he's working in the chaplain. It's a great job. Be proactive, ask. The worst they can say is no. And then after 5 months, I was strategic. I learned after 3 months, I eventually wanted out of the kitchen. And I knew that I wanted to become an orderly. And Chewy, who assigned all of the jobs as an orderly, I formed a friendship with him. And I asked him if there was an opening. He said, yes. And he said, these are the jobs. And then I swept floors for 15 to 30 minutes the last 8 months of my federal prison sentence. So be proactive, look for work. Don't give up. Try not to just get assigned a job. Mark, good to see you. I see your hand up. Talk to me.
All right, I'm unmuted. Good to see you too, Justin.
Thank you.
As you know, I'm surrendering next Wednesday, the 22nd, to Montgomery.
Yep.
And I think I'm ready. I've got my release plan. I've been working on it with Michael. It's about 14 pages plus attachments. So I think I'm in pretty good shape. But I was just wondering, is it bad form to spend $350 at commissary the first week and just load up with, everything I need? Should I be a little bit more discreet about that?
I would. Some prisons block it up where it's $360 a month. They won't even allow you to spend more than $180 every other week. Some prisons
Okay.
won't. But yeah, it can be a little off-putting when you're like, some guys have $40 a month coming in, and you're like, hey guys, can you help me carry this back up to my dorm? You got 8 bags.
Yeah, I want to avoid that situation.
Yeah. So part of Michael filmed a great webinar called Getting Uncomfortable on the BOP. And it can be uncomfortable because we're used to going with things that we want when we want them. But knowing that all eyes will be upon you and people will assess, they'll have a perception of you as an attorney and an educated dude who speaks really well with a pretty short sentence. They're going to think, oh, here's an entitled white collar guy. So if you lay low, avoid problems, and do your job, because people will be offering you a chance to do your job for a book of stamps, you do your job, and you're judicious in that first shopping, I just think it goes a long way, right? I think it's a good idea. So yeah, do 150, 160, and maybe a little more. I'm probably gonna do a couple $100, but I think that's a good idea. I saw Amy shaking her head as well. I mean, people have been in prison for a long time, and they don't have resources coming in to the degree that some of you will. And I think it's a good idea. I did that pretty early in Michael encouraged me to do that as well. When I was in prison, it was a limit of 290. And I'm like, I need everything. I need everything. And as much as I needed everything, I spent like 180 that first one. And a lot of things I thought I needed, I didn't get to like my third or fourth month, like a watch, running shoes. I bought a pair of shoes, for $10, took a month to come in. But yeah, I think that's a good idea, Mark. I want you to be patient and understand.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great release plan, by the way. Thank you. Release plans are great, by the way. It's kind of like a sentencing narrative. It does no good if you say my upbringing was great, it was bad, it was nice. You really want to be vulnerable. You want to be honest. You want to be open. You want to share intimate details with people. And it's an inverted process. The more you share, the more you own it, the more it's going to help you. Mark did that. Paul did that. It gives them a chance to learn more about you. Why? Because all they have is your probation report that doesn't say great things. So the more you're vulnerable and open and honest, it catches some of them off guard, even if you share things that are bad or wrong, things that you want to change. That's what they want to hear. And then when you change, give them credit for the change. That's my opinion. I see more hands coming up. One moment. Who's hand? Mike, I'll come back to you in a moment. I see a hand up. All it says is iPhone. Is that your name, iPhone? Please lower your hand and ask the question, iPhone.
That might be me because I'm not so sharp at.
Let's get it together. You're in law school and a physician. You can
Right.
figure it out. Okay, what's the question?
I just want to explain a little bit about jobs. I went to Coleman, which has a low, medium, and penitentiary, as long as low and medium women's. And if you have a special skill, they're not going to waste you in the kitchen. I can do two things. One is I'm a surgeon for 29 years, and I've been breeding racehorses for 25 years. So I know how to handle heavy duty equipment, which they give to low, not to the to low if you have the skill to do it. From tractors, everything up to a crane, I can work. So if like Europe, about the stock market, but that's not going to help you, but with around the camp, right? So that was marched immediately after intake, right up to the infirmaries for the whole section was in the penitentiary. Made me very nervous. So if you have a special skill, if you know how to operate heavy duty equipment, if you're low or a prison camp, they'll take you. A little bit of levity. These guys would get shanked, and from the penitentiary and bleeding all over the place. I try to say, well, put some local in. They don't mind getting shanked, but they sure hate getting local anesthetic so I can do my work. A little levity there.
Yeah, we get it. Thank you for scaring everyone who's about to go to prison. He's joking.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's
Please.
penitentiary.
We don't need any additional crisis management calls this afternoon. Let's keep it together.
Okay.
So there are people who have created their release plan who have said, I want to teach, this is my job. That would be a great end goal. it's also okay if you get assigned to jobs to still volunteer and teach this class. It could be your job, it might not be your job, but it doesn't change that you could put up a list and visit in education. Would anyone like to attend my class? That's what I did. I taught a class when I was in prison about the stock market. I asked my case manager, she said, frankly, I don't care. Put up a list in education. If anyone signs up, great, you've got permission to teach a class. And I did for 30 days. So the question then, if in that first month you're teaching, because it's not a good idea to give unsolicited advice in federal prison, especially if you just got there. But if people are coming to a course that you're teaching, you're giving back, you're contributing, you're building it into your release plan. And then if unfortunately you make a mistake, of which I made so many in prison, the guys can take it a little easier on you if they see that you're contributing and giving back, right? They see that we're human beings. We make mistakes. I did some things that at the time I didn't think were that big a deal. And because I adjusted well and I did my job and I didn't complain and I did a pretty good job, when I made a mistake, they took it easy on me. I shared a story earlier this morning with someone in our community. A lot of people snore in prison, okay? People snore in general. And there was a story when I was in prison of a guy, a very interesting case. He went to prison for 9 months for smuggling exotic turtles in from Asia. They caught him at LAX, pled guilty, and he got 9 months in prison. But he surrendered to federal prison like 5'7", 300 pounds, and snored so loud. We've never heard anything like it. It was, I can't even describe it. And guys would throw jackets on him. They would cover him in toilet paper. Shut up. It was very uncomfortable. But within like 4 or 5 days, he quit smoking because I was in a federal prison that was privately run that allowed you to buy these Buglar cigarettes. That first week he smoked. He didn't exercise, snored. Guys were irate. He gave up smoking. He started to walk the track 6 or 7 hours a day. He ended up losing 150 pounds in the 7 months that he went from like 375 or something to 225. And even though he was still snoring, it got better and better and better and better with the losing of weight. Nobody gave him a hard time because they saw that he quit smoking and he was exercising, eating healthier, and he was trying. And it was, for a while, it was as loud as ever. But consider your environment. Many of you, if you're going to a camp, there is continued crisis in prison. There are problems. There are case managers who may not give you what you want, transfers, admittance into program. There are problems. But for many of you, you're still going to be productive, and that could include exercise. And if you can adjust in that way and avoid problems in work, that helps you overcome problems like snoring. Because I know of people who would snore, but they wouldn't exercise. And those are the guys that had problems because they weren't doing anything to improve the community. And people felt they were selfish. And as a result of them not making changes, it was making it harder on everyone. And they punished the guy, not physically, but, waking up every day to rolls of toilet paper covered, jackets thrown on them, and just kind of generally ostracized within the camp. Learn from these things. You're living in a community of felons. Contribute as best you can in those early days. Let's see if there's any other questions as we go a couple of minutes past 11. Are there any questions that I haven't touched on or addressed? The person who asked about the visit in Yankton is an RDOT. Okay. Direct there. Let's see.
Michael?
Yeah, Justin, talk to me. Yes.
Justin, sorry. This is Jack. I couldn't find the raise my hand button, so
That's
I
okay.
just. All right. I used a lot of your stuff to help my girlfriend who got caught up into a non-white collar drug conspiracy thing. And so your stuff for the parole, or I'm sorry, the probation report and all like that was very, very helpful. My question is, how soon before her she's got 10 years, doing the math comes back to about 7.5. At what point should she start working on the release plan and those pieces and parts? Now?
Yes, yesterday, now, right? Immediately. Michael began creating his release plan when he was locked in a county jail in 1987. And it continued through his release in August of 2013. You need time. You need time to build a record, to demonstrate how you're learning, how you're growing. why you'll never return to another courtroom. That should be shared with potential employers, funders, friends, family, probation officers. And there's someone in our community recently, their wife was on the webinar and she's like, my husband's been in jail for 3 years. Admittedly, we still have some resources, but I know he wants to work. He's kind of wasted this time. How should he start the release plan? And I'd say own it. Own the fact that he's done nothing for 3 years but watch TV and walk the track. And now he wants to do better. There's value in authenticity. There's value in, if there's anything you take from our work, we strive to be authentic, honorable, and honest. We own it. If you've wasted time, own it. Talk about it, but then talk about what you're going to do moving forward. And that's how this person opened the release plan. I've been in jail for 3 years, prison for 3 years. I only started doing first step back programming because I wanted the time off. I wasn't fully vested, and I'm now seeing the consequences of that. I want to do better. Here's how. I mean, how can someone, they already know if he's been watching TV anyway. So why lie? That's not a release plan. If you lie, tell the truth. I've wasted 3 years. The only value has been the calendar pages turning. I'm closer to home, but I'm beginning to see the impact of just exercising all day and watching the Kardashians. And he wrote it. And now he's going to build out what he'll do moving forward. So she should start her release plan right now. And there are people who don't know how to start. It's the reason we film these webinars. And we film so many of them about the release plan. So whether you work with us in the capacity that Amy or Mark did with our team, or you use our free resources, we want to help you. And it starts with putting yourself in the shoes of the stakeholders, their perception of you, and what are you doing to change it? It ain't through happy talk. I've never had a parking ticket before, send me home. No. It's documenting, it's sharing it, and building it for years to come. And I think
I appreciate what you offer. I've been on these webinars regularly. Thanks.
You're very welcome, my friend. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Okay. Anything else we're missing here? Any other questions? Any other hands up that I'm missing? Okay. There were some changes to the First Step Act. I should say people got some credits of late. Linda, I think you left a comment. A number of people in our community learned that their release
Sunday they kicked in automatically.
Yeah. So there's been a change for a number of people. I got messages that their release date was moved up. So these things are happening. It takes a little bit of.
They're giving out the 10 days a month. We didn't see too many 15 days a month coming on that auto calc. And I don't know if it's auto calc or if somebody manually calculated it and uploaded it into the system, because you don't really know this stuff. But Sunday they did kick in for a lot of people,
yes,
including me.
And I saw a message here. I think someone actually from the federal prison camp might be on this call to everyone. The rumor at FPC Yankton is that you'll be visiting here in March. Is that a rumor? There's a chance. So Michael Santos, my partner, has been traveling the country implementing our programs in prisons and jails, in many federal prisons. And there's a chance, yes, that he may end up visiting Yankton, which would be awesome, because it's also a chance for him to see people in our community. Last week, Michael was in Pekin, Terre Haute. He's been in prison all across the country, and it's super cool. And people who have been on our webinars who are now in prison are in the audience when Michael is speaking. So it's a nice, yes. So I believe, Sarah, that Michael will end up in Yankton, and hopefully the prison professors programs will continue to get implemented in prisons across the country. So thank you so much for joining our community and contributing. Where can I get a sample of the release plan? How do you get medical considerations such as vitamin D? I think they may sell vitamin D in the commissary. I'm not sure.
They do.
They do. Yeah. So
that they do.
Yeah, you can go to www.bop.gov, look at the commissary list, and you'll see what they purchase. Amy, I see your hand up.
I just had a quick question about, you mentioned it multiple times about probation officer. The probation officer that my husband had pre-sentencing, is that the probation officer who will follow him through his release and through his supervised period?
It will be a different person. So there was a pretrial services officer. There was a probation officer who wrote the probation report. Then upon his release from prison, where usually I think about 120 days out of his release, they'll assign a probation officer. That person will come to your home, do a visit.
Okay.
Then I met my probation officer in the halfway house. Isaiah Murrow also approved my job, which was helpful. And then I was on probation for 3 years. And so it was a different person.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, that's good. All you had to say was that's good for me to fully understand. Good. That's good news. That's right. Where can I get a sample of the release plan? We are updating the release plan course. Michael's including information on administrative remedies, offering guidance on how you can do that in custody. I believe we don't have the PDF yet, but I do believe that there's a workbook available at Prison Professors. It might not be on here yet. I know Michael is writing extensively. By the way, these are some of the programs that go into prisons and jails across the country. If you're curious about like what Michael is doing or what the nonprofit is doing, this is what he's doing. He's creating these awesome programs, and many people in our community will work with us to create a course, and that course becomes something that gets implemented with people like Bill McGlashan, or many of you may recall Massimo Giannulli from the Varsity Blues case. He created a course with us, and of course, Michael's creating tons of content that's getting disseminated to prisons and jails across the country. So I don't know if the new release plan workbook is up yet. Michael was doing an edit. I don't see it here yet, but it's coming. So once it's done and updated, we'll put a link to it. Actually, Scott, would you put up a link to the resource page in case people want to review it? There are some books that could be bought. Again, the resources go to the nonprofit, but we'll let you know when we have the release plan course and all of that stuff done. It's a great page. Michael works very hard. He does a lot on the Prison Professor site. I'd encourage you to spend time there every day on it. Okay. And also a good idea to read Earning Freedom. We give away that audiobook. That's on the website. So just spend a few minutes every day on the website. Any other questions? Anything that I'm missing here?
Justin, I have one question about post sentence, and that is, we obviously joined up with you guys. We had already been sentenced, but is it a good idea to write the judge? All the time that we were in the pre-sentencing, we were told, oh, don't write the judge, don't, and obviously that was a mistake, because I, would have done something different had I been a part of Prison Professors. But now that I'm actually on home confinement, shortly going to be into probation, is it a good idea to write the judge and explain what I've been doing?
According to Chris Maloney, the former federal chief of probation, if it's the right message, he wasn't against it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't encourage you to write them, 9 times, but if you just sent them a note that said, since my sentencing hearing, I've worked hard to make amends and create a new record, and I've documented that by way of my release plan. So I wanted to share it with you. I mean, that's very easy, and there's nothing wrong with that. Presuming you're not excusing, you're not blaming, you're compliant. There's restitution. You've been painted. I just don't see any downside in sharing that, because at some point you may want to get off probation early. And so I just
actually, in our case, I don't know that the judge ever really heard our side. You want to know the truth. It just always was, oh, at the next hearing, you'll get to say your piece. Oh, and we finally got to the sentencing, and our lawyer said, oh, we just wish you'd just stand up and say you're sorry. That's what actually happened. Yeah.
And that comes back to what I discussed with Amy. Amy discussed how the release plan had a huge impact, but even if it didn't, perhaps it impacts somebody else. There are people in our community who retain us, they work with us, and they still get a guideline sentence. But it doesn't mean the work, of course, we don't want that, but it happens. It doesn't mean the work that they have created maybe didn't influence the judge the way they wanted, could influence the case manager, could influence the person in the halfway house, but also so many of the people who are not even involved in the system. The work that I did frankly had greater influence on people that didn't work for the BOP. It had greater influence on getting an employer hiring me.
Yeah, I mean, by the time we left, I had a package together, and I had documented everything that, if nothing else, that I had tried to do, because it was kind of a pony circus.
And And there's
And they did scan that into the system. The case manager that finally came back, we were like on a holding pattern because he was gone, and we had a case manager that was just not doing anything, even showing up. But they did scan it into their system, so it is in there. The plan that you guys had prepared together with my attachments, which showed basically, and it was a short-term sentence, and
Yes.
that is a big difference.
There are differences, but what is consistent? And if there's one takeaway from our work, there's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it and document it over a sustained period of time. And that's what we want all of you to do within that first 30 days. And if you have yet to go to prison, you should be writing it. We've covered why. If you're on probation or in home confinement on this webinar and you haven't written it, you should write it based on what we've learned and the higher levels of liberty that it could provide to all of you. And then you can have an experience that's different from so many of the people in prison who say in the halfway house, I wish I was back in prison. I cannot believe they're not approving my job. This is awful. This is terrible. We want you to have a different experience because oftentimes people release from prison to look at reputationally, financially, professionally. Many people are coming home with nothing and starting over, which is why the prison term at times can be the easiest part of the sanction, especially if it's a short sentence. Even someone in our community recently went in for 51 months. And he's like, you said something one time that was crazy. I'm like, what? He's like, you made it seem like prison was the easiest part. I thought you were nuts, but you know what? It's true. Because on 51 months with RDAP and Good Time and First Step Act, he's like, my goodness, I'm going to be home like really, really quickly. What the hell am I going to do? Well, if you don't document it and show it, you come home from prison and then you feel like I've wasted that time. We don't want you to waste that time. The first day, the first week, because habits are hard to change. If you, that first week, you get off on a, kind of too much exercise, a lot of TV and complaining, it's not going to be great. There's a lot of guys in prison that say, I'll start preparing when I have 6 months to the halfway house. Utter nonsense. By then, you've never started. Okay. Someone mentioned they have a 77-month sentence. Any hope and motivation? Yeah, I can tell you on a 77-month sentence, it's ending. Okay. The end is coming sooner than you think, thanks to prison reform and earned time credits and good time. And we hope more changes coming down the road. If you look at the First Step Act that passed 4 years ago, I can tell you, Michael's been advocating for the First Step Act for 30 years. His book, Earning Freedom, right here in my office, he hand wrote while I was next to him in a federal prison in 2008. He's been writing about the First Step Act and earning freedom for 30 years. And it came. Is there a chance that more reform is coming? Maybe. Do you want to be at the forefront of that? What if furloughs come down the road? Furloughs exist, but what about a furlough where you leave the prison and then you go back? You leave to work and then you go back. Do you have a higher likelihood of getting a furlough if you document why you're worthy of the work and you've avoided problems and you have employment offers? Probably. And that aligns with what John Gustin told us, that there's only 7,000 beds in the halfway house. So the case manager in prison needs to make a good bet on who they should give more time to. Why? Because we're all kind of driven by our own self-interest. I'm not going to give that guy time if he hasn't proved worthy of it. He can make me look bad and cost me my job. I'm going to give it to the guy that's proved worthy of it. No different with a furlough. So on a 77-month sentence, you can calculate and do the math. I want you to build the release plan and work under the idea more reform could be coming. But even if it isn't, the end is coming. And you don't want your 77-month sentence to become a life sentence, which is what it is for a lot of guys. I served 9 months in a minimum security camp for a tax fraud. I'm struggling. How long have you been home? 17 years. What? What have you been doing for? No one will hire me. I'm a felon. My reputation. I lost my licenses. I was only ever an accountant. That's pretty common. Well, you got to start over. You have to do work that you think is beneath your skill set. If I did it, that's kind of what it takes. But it's easier if you're really building a record. Frank, I see your hand.
Hi, Justin. A real quick question. With regard to the Elderly Offenders Act, has any progress been made on that?
nothing other than what discussed last week with John Gustin. If you're 60 or older, you're eligible for a third, not a sentence reduction, but a third of that sentence to be served on home confinement. John suggested that once you hit the 2/3 eligibility mark, you let your case manager know, and hopefully they'll put you in the queue. There are some people, we know of someone who had a 10-year sentence. As soon as that person hit the 2/3 mark, he was processed out in about 3 weeks, which is pretty cool. But I've seen no update or change from when we discussed it last, other than the power of advocacy and hoping that you have the right record for your case manager to put in for it once you're eligible.
Well, ironically, last week was the only week that I missed.
We discussed it last week with John, because we have someone in our community that's getting ready to go in for 6 months and who's older than 60. And there was this concern like, okay, I'm 65, 6-month sentence. That means 2 months on home confinement. And we had to embrace the reality that just because you're eligible doesn't mean the case manager is going to put you in that day. It's sort of like when I was in the halfway house and I hit my 90% mark and I went to my case manager. I said, I was naive. I said, I'm ready to go to home confinement now. And she said, well, that's nice. I'm happy to hear that. I'm going to put you in for home confinement. And it ended up taking like 2 weeks. So even though I hit the 90% mark, I think I went to home confinement like the 95% mark. But at that point, you've been through so much. It's just sort of like, whatever. You just get to a point where you become conditioned to the problems. Even now, all of you on this webinar, regardless of where you are in the journey, you've endured so much. So it's just kind of like more to come. That's what Michael and I used to say in federal prison. When I'd get like something bad would happen, or I would complain. I'm not complain, but something would happen. And I'd say, this happened at home, this happened at home. And he'd always say, more to come. So there's more to come. You get conditioned to it, but it's how you respond to it with dignity and to plan. Try not to complain, proving worthy of the love and support of your family. And people that can do that just tend to have better experiences. And I want all of that we want all of that for you. And I'm very transparent that my experience was much easier. I was 33. I didn't have children. I served 1 year in a camp. My experience isn't common. I'm aware of that. And I'm so grateful for that. And I know that many of you have it measurably harder, which is why we have people in our community you can learn from besides me. And we want to help. We want to help you. Whether you hire our team or not, we want to help because we know it's a wretched system. And we're going to continue to do these webinars every week. Let me close by how I opened. If you think your lawyers would find value in these free webinars, please send us a message with their name. We're going to reach out to them and invite them and their clients to participate. Because I loved when I got some calls last week from one lawyer who was so incredibly honest. He said, Justin, I've been billing my clients because I bill for my work. That's what I do. But I'm giving them the wrong information. And I said, yeah, I don't negotiate a plea agreement because I'm not a lawyer. And he's like, I should never be dispensing prison advice, but I want to help. I love my clients. I want to help. But I think I'm giving them the wrong information. I'm like, well, what's one you did recently? He's like, I just tell my clients that prison is really boring and the time will end. And I'm like, but it's not boring. It can be incredibly. He's like, no, I know that now because I attended your webinar. But he's like, I don't ever want to tell a client that it's boring again. That's terrible advice. And I shouldn't be billing for it. So I'm like, you are honest and honorable. I love it. And he's like, we need to get more people on these webinars. So if you like your lawyer and you think there would be benefit to it, please, please, please leave your lawyer's name, message it privately. We'll reach out. And if there are things you think we should be covering, tell us. If there are subjects you'd like us to cover, we're not mind readers. Please tell us things you think we should cover. And we have a lot of experience. We'll cover it. And if I don't know the answer, I'll rely on someone on our team to get the answer. So, for example, I know we've discussed forfeiture versus restitution. Mike, we've discussed that. We should line up a separate call about the nuances of that. So if there are subjects you think we should be covering, tell us. Until then, we're going to continue to do these every single week. And tell us your lawyer's name if you think they'd find value. Go to Prison Professors, get the books, get the resources. And with that said, I'm happy to end the webinar unless there are any other questions. Is that it? Okay, everyone. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend. I'll put out this replay in a couple of days along with resources, and I'll look forward to seeing all of you next Thursday.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you all very much.